garhichit tadvaya samtirtam usanti manasa nayatra hamsa niramant ushikshaya. And this verse says, those words which do not describe the glories of the Lord, who alone can sanctify the atmosphere of the whole universe, are considered by saintly persons to be like unto a place of pilgrimage for crows. Since the all-perfect persons are inhabitants of the transcendental abode, they do not derive any pleasure there. Purport by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. Crows and swans are not birds of the same feather because of their different mental attitudes. The fruitive workers or passionate men are compared to the crows, whereas the all-perfect saintly persons are compared to the swans. The crows take pleasure in a place where garbage is thrown out, just as the passionate fruitive workers take pleasure in wine and women and places for gross sense pleasure. The swans do not take pleasure in the places where the crows are assembled for conferences and meetings. They are instead seen in the atmosphere of natural scenic beauty, where there are transparent reservoirs of water, nicely decorated with stems of lotus flowers, in variegated colors of natural beauty. That is the difference between the two classes of birds. Nature has influenced different species of life with different mentalities, and it is not possible to bring them up into the same rank and file. Similarly, there are different kinds of literature for different types of men of different mentality. Mostly the market literatures which attract men of the crows categories are literatures containing refused remnants of sensuous topics. So this word refused, depends how you pronounce it. It means things that are like thrown away like trash. They are generally known as mundane talks in relation with the gross body and subtle mind. They are full of subject matter described in decorative language, full of mundane similes and metaphorical arrangements. Yet, with all that, they do not glorify the Lord. Okay, we're going to have to keep quiet, please. Let's please keep quiet. Yet with all that, they do not glorify the Lord. Such poetry and prose on any subject matter is considered decoration of a dead body. Spiritually advanced men, who are compared to the swans, do not take pleasure in such dead literatures, which are sources of pleasure for men who are spiritually dead. These literatures, in the modes of passion and ignorance, are distributed under the different labels, but they can hardly help the spiritual urge of the human being, and thus the swan-like spiritually advanced men have nothing to do with them. Such spiritually advanced men are called also manasa, because they always keep up the standard of transcendental, voluntary service to the Lord on the spiritual plane. This completely forbids fruitive activities for gross bodily sense gratification, satisfaction, or subtle speculation of the material, egotistic mind. Social literary men, scientists, mundane poets, theatrical philosophers, and politicians who are completely absorbed in the material advancement of sense pleasure are all dolls of the material energy. They take pleasure in a place where rejected subject matters are thrown. According to Swami Sridhara, this is the pleasure of the prostitute hunters. But literatures which describe the glories of the Lord are enjoyed by the Paramahansas, who have grasped the essence of human activities. Wow, this is what you call a scathing condemnation of mundane literatures and mundane talk and the whole culture of sense gratification. The culture of sense gratification is something that distracts the minds of people from the goal of spiritual life. And it is responsible for many people wasting their entire life. And unless people lose their attraction for such rubbish literature and rubbish topics, they will never get serious about spiritual life. Therefore, Srila Prabhupada has printed significant literature by, first of all, translating the two most important books in the entire universe, Srimad Bhagavad and Srimad Bhagavatam. Why are they so important? Well, Bhagavad Gita is Krishna answering every significant question to clear the path for complete surrender to him. And Srimad Bhagavatam expands the whole subject matter of Bhagavad Gita, which is basically who is God, who are the living entities, what is this material creation, what is time, and what is the real duty of everyone in this world. So without understanding these 5 fundamental philosophical questions, a person remains in ignorance about what is the goal of life. So here he says that the general populace engages in mundane talks in relation with the gross body and subtle mind. They are full of subject matter described in decorative language, full of mundane similes and metaphorical arrangements. So if you ever read a book of modern poetry, that's exactly a description of it. It has a lot of basically silly subjects, very, very few what you would consider uplifting or profound subject matter. And usually it's focused on silly, mundane things with a lot of metaphors and similes and mental images that's meant to be entertaining and not at all spiritually elevating. So these literatures in the modes of passion and ignorance are distributed under different labels, but they can hardly help the spiritual urge of the human being, and thus the swan-like spiritually advanced men have nothing to do with them. So you go to any bookstore today or any library, and it's full of books, all kinds of subjects. They have all the different headings, sociology, psychology, this thing, this ology, that ology. And people are there looking at them, and they're hoping to find that book that'll interest their or pique their interest, and basically it's a waste of time. Most books are just a waste of time. Why? Because number one, time is precious. We don't know how much time we have in this world. Number two, most of these books just divert our attention away from what is essential in life. And what is essential in life is developing the spiritual urge that Prabhupada talks about. He says that such literatures are spiritually dead. And they're in the modes of ignorance, passion and ignorance. And they can hardly help the spiritual urge of the human being. So what is the spiritual urge of the human being? It's to know what is our actual identity, who we are, and what is our real purpose in life, and how we can attain liberation from the cycle of birth and death. This is a spiritual urge. It's the urge for freedom. Just like there's so many freedom movements in this world, but they're all mundane movements based on the body and ethnic and culture and national or racial identification. But real freedom is when we're free of the influence of the modes of material nature, of time, of birth, death, old age, and disease, and we're able to develop profound love for the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So it says here, any subject matter is considered decoration of a dead body. So if you decorate a dead body, it's meaningless because the body is dead. What's the difference? There's no human being in it anymore. So, how do we develop this higher taste? That's the whole point. Because all mundane education helps us to develop this lower taste. We become like a crow. Crows like to eat garbage. You never really realize the nature of a crow until you go to India, especially Calcutta, and you see the crows. There's hundreds of them in these open garbage bins, and they're in ecstasy, eating junk. So, and the noise that they make, their conversation, caw, 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 like that. It's not a very nice sound, right? Everything about the crow is inauspicious. It has a dark black body, and they hang around garbage and dead bodies, and they eat horrible things, and they make horrible sounds. And their only preoccupation is eating. So that is a very, very low level of consciousness in the mode of ignorance. And there are people exactly like that. They're only interested in eating and sleeping and having illicit activities and intoxicating. And even when they speak, it doesn't sound nice. They're these raspy, rough voices, and they look like what they eat. People that eat a lot of pig, they look like pigs. You go to Germany, they eat. I was in a German train station, and more than once I saw some big, overweight guy. On one hand, he has a sausage. The other hand, he has a piece of bread, and he takes a bite out of the sausage, chews on a little bit, then he takes a bite out of the bread. He doesn't even make a sandwich, right? He just has the raw sausage and the bread, and he eats like that. And then for a second, he puts the bread in the same hand as the sausage, and he gets a bottle of beer and drinks the beer, and then goes back to, it's the most grossest thing I've seen in my life. And you see it in public. I don't know. You ever been in?
Germany.
Yeah.
They eat swine, they say.
Swine, yeah, swine.
Keep eating it in public.
They eat it in public, yeah. It's very gross. So the consciousness of such a person is very, very low. And
a lot of the beef eaters start looking like cows.
Yeah.
Their body is very flat.
Yeah. Not a nice cow, but one of those horrible cows. Yeah. So we need to understand how horrible that type of culture is, and we see it here also. It's all over the world now, even in India. Okay, so and Prabhupada explains in the 17th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, he says, in the divisions of faith, O son of Bharata, this is 17th chapter, 3rd verse. According to one's existence under the various modes of nature, one evolves a particular kind of faith. The living being is said to be of a particular faith according to the modes he has acquired. And in the purport he says, everyone has a particular type of faith, regardless of what he is. But his faith is considered good, passionate, or ignorant, according to the nature he has acquired. Thus, according to his particular type of faith, one associates with certain persons. Now, the real fact is that every living being, as is stated in the 15th chapter, is originally a fragmental part and parcel of the Supreme Lord. Therefore, one is originally transcendental to all the modes of material nature. You see, it's talking about originally. That means we were all originally with Krishna. This is what is being strongly implied here. That we were all with Krishna originally, and we're part and parcel of the Lord. But when one forgets his relationship with the Supreme Personality of Godhead and comes in contact with the material nature in conditional life, he generates his own position by association with different varieties of material nature. The resultant artificial faith and existence are only material. We're talking about artificial faith and existence. Although one may be conducted by some impression or some conception of life, originally he is nirguna, or transcendental. Therefore, one has to become cleansed of the material contamination that he has acquired in order to regain his relationship with the Supreme Lord. That is the only path back without fear, Krishna consciousness. If one is situated in Krishna consciousness, then that path is guaranteed for his elevation to the perfectional stage. If one does not take to this path of self-realization, then he is surely to be conducted by the influence of the modes of nature. So this is a realistic portrayal of the original nature of every one of us, of all living entities. We were originally with Krishna. We were originally free of the influence of the modes of material nature. That's our natural position. The position that we're in now is not natural, and it's due to association with the modes of nature, association with unholy people, etc. And it's an artificial acquisition of an identity that has nothing to do with who we really are. It's basically a false thing. And unless we understand that, we can go on the rest of life in that false, let's say, conception of who we actually are. Therefore, one has to become cleansed of the material contamination that he has acquired in order to regain his relationship with the Supreme Lord. That is the only path back without fear, Krishna consciousness. If one is situated in Krishna consciousness, then that path is guaranteed for his elevation to the perfectional stage. If one does not take to this path of self-realization, then he is surely to be conducted by the influence of the modes of nature. So this is a serious subject, because in the 14th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, it says, 14:19, when one properly sees that in all activities no other performer is at work than these modes of nature, and he knows the Supreme Lord who is transcendental to all these modes, he attains my spiritual nature. So we are all, just like we just recited in the Srimad Bhagavatam, first canto, first verse, and it says that it says, by him, meaning Krishna, even the great sages and demigods are placed into illusion, as one is bewildered by the illusory representations of water seen in fire or land seen on water. Both of those things are illusory. Like when you're driving on a hot day on an asphalt road, you see in this distance that there's water on the road, but there's no water there. It is actually an illusory, let's say it's a mirage, due to the heat on the asphalt, and therefore it inverts we actually see a reflection of the sky on the asphalt. It's a optical illusion, right? Or land seen on water. Again, on a hot day, if you're on a boat in the ocean, you think you see land in the distance, but there's no land there. So this is a bewilderment by the illusory representations in this material world. And only because of him, of Krishna, do the material universes temporarily manifested by the reactions of the three modes of nature appear factual, although they are unreal. Now, this is what keeps us in the material world. These illusory representations that we consider to be real, but actually they're not. And it's almost impossible to become free of such illusion unless we sit down on a regular basis and hear Srimad Bhagavatam. See, this is the first verse of the Srimad Bhagavatam. It basically summarizes the whole subject of Bhagavatam. And therefore, unless we hear about Krishna and the transcendental abode, we will think that there's nothing beyond the material world. Or we become convinced, like the Mayavadis, that what's beyond the material world is a state of either nothingness or just energy. And there's no people. The Mayavadis actually believe that Vaikuntha and Goloka Vrindavan do not exist. And that Krishna, when he appears in the material world, he has a material body. And he's subject to the same foibles as all the living entities: birth, death, old age, and disease. And they do not think that devotional service is the way to connect with God. They think that simply refraining from activity is the way to achieve perfection. And they deny that there's individuality in the spiritual world. They deny Krishna's individuality. This is called the material conception of life. The ultimate material conception of life is the Mayavad philosophy. What does it mean, material conception of life? The technical word for it in Sanskrit is tamasa buddhi, intelligence in ignorance. What is intelligence in ignorance? It's basically the complete opposite of spiritual knowledge. People don't think that there's a soul. They think that everything is simply made out of matter. And they also believe that consciousness is made from combination of material elements. They believe in chemical evolution. That is, that, life is simply a collection of chemicals. And at one point, death means the chemicals dissipate, and that's it. There's no such thing as an eternal soul. They actually pray to some, I don't know to who, that after death there's nothing. So it's a hopeless philosophy, the Mayavad philosophy and the atheistic philosophy. And they deny any knowledge that is beyond the scope of the senses' perceptions. They don't accept anything beyond the senses' perception. If they can't measure something, if they can't see it, if they can't taste it, if they can't measure it, then they're not interested in it. It's not scientific as far as they're concerned. So this is the material conception of life, the tamasa buddhi understanding. Okay, so such people are interested in these nonsense literatures, books written by so-called philosophers and great poets and writers that are full of nonsense, nonsensical ideas, but pretty, what do you call it, similes, metaphors, and jugglery of language. And they'll sip some wine and listen to poetry, and this is their material high. It's a little more subtle than sitting in a bar and drinking beer and listening to nonsense. But it's the same thing. It's all diversion of the mind from Krishna. Okay, any questions about this? Okay, and we're going to verse number 11, which Prabhupada quotes a lot. He quotes it in the preamble to his Srimad Bhagavatam. Let's see where it is. Yeah, it's in the preface to the Srimad Bhagavatam that he wrote himself. Tatvak visargo janataga viplavo yasmin pratislokam abadavati api namanyana anantasya yaso nikitani yat shinvanti gayanti grinanti sadavaha. On the other hand, what does that mean? Well, now this is the opposite of the previous verse, which is basically says that these material subject matters do not glorify the Lord, do not sanctify the atmosphere of the whole universe. However, they are considered as a place of pilgrimage for crows, in other words, garbage, right? So now the opposite is going to be described. On the other hand, that literature which is full of descriptions of the transcendental glories of the name, fame, forms, pastimes, etc., of the unlimited Supreme Lord is a different creation, full of transcendental words, directed toward bringing about a revolution in the impious lives of this world's misdirected civilization. Such transcendental literatures, even though imperfectly composed, are heard, sung, and accepted by purified men who are thoroughly honest. This is a beautiful verse. That's why Prabhupada quotes it in the preface of the Srimad Bhagavatam. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. It is a qualification of the great thinkers to pick up the best even from the worst. Or as we say in English, take the best and leave the rest. But he worded it a little bit differently. He says, pick up the best even from the worst. Right? It is said that the intelligent man should pick up nectar from a stock of poison, should accept gold even from a filthy place, should accept a good and qualified wife even from an obscure family, and should accept a good lesson even from a man or from a teacher who comes from the untouchables. These are some of the ethical instructions for everyone, in every place without exception. But a saint is far above the level of an ordinary man. He is always absorbed in glorifying the Supreme Lord, because by broadcasting the holy name and fame of the Supreme Lord, the polluted atmosphere of the world will change. And as a result of propagating the transcendental literatures like Srimad Bhagavatam, people will become sane in their transactions. While preparing this commentation on this particular stanza of Srimad Bhagavatam, we have a crisis before us. Our neighboring friend China has attacked the border of India with a militaristic spirit. We have practically no business in the political field, yet we see that previously there were both China and India, and they both lived peacefully for centuries without ill feeling. The reason is that they lived those days in an atmosphere of God consciousness, and every country over the surface of the world was God-fearing, pure-hearted, and simple. There was no question of political diplomacy. There is no cause of quarrel between the two countries, China and India, over land, which is not very suitable for habitation, and certainly there is no cause for fighting on this issue. But due to the age of quarrel, Kali, which we have discussed, there is always a chance of quarrel on slight provocation. This is due not to the issue in question, but to the polluted atmosphere of this age. Systematically, there is propaganda by a section of people to stop glorification of the name and fame of the Supreme Lord. Therefore, there's a great need for disseminating the message of Srimad Bhagavatam all over the world. It is the duty of every responsible Indian to broadcast the transcendental message of Srimad Bhagavatam throughout the world, to do all the supermost good, as well as to bring about the desired peace in the world. Because India has failed in her duty by neglecting this responsible work, there is so much quarrel and trouble all over the world. We are confident that if the transcendental message of Srimad Bhagavatam is received only by the leading men of the world, certainly there will be a change of heart, and naturally the people in general will follow them. The mass of people in general are tools in the hands of the modern politicians and leaders of the people. If there is a change of heart of the leaders only, certainly there will be a radical change in the atmosphere of the world. We know that our honest attempt to present this great literature conveying transcendental messages for reviving the God consciousness of the people in general and re-spiritualizing the world atmosphere is fraught with many difficulties. Our presenting this matter in adequate language, especially a foreign language, will certainly fail, and there will be so many literary discrepancies despite our honest attempt to present it in the proper way. But we are sure that with all our faults in this connection, the seriousness of the subject matter will be taken into consideration, and the leaders of society will still accept this due to its being an honest attempt to glorify the Almighty God. When there is fire in a house, the inmates of the house go out to get help from the neighbors who may be foreigners, and yet without knowing the language, the victims of the fire express themselves, and the neighbors understand the need, even though not expressed in the same language. The same spirit of cooperation is needed to broadcast this transcendental message of the Srimad Bhagavatam throughout the polluted atmosphere of the world. After all, it is a technical science of spiritual values, and thus we are concerned with the techniques and not with the language. If the techniques of this great literature are understood by the people of the world, there will be success. When there are too many materialistic activities by the people in general all over the world, there is no wonder that a person or a nation attacks another person or nation on slight provocation. That is the rule of this age of Kali, or quarrel. The atmosphere is already polluted with corruption of all description, and everyone knows it well. There are so many unwanted literatures full of materialistic ideas of sense gratification. In many countries, there are bodies appointed by the state to detect and censor obscene literature. This means that neither the government nor the responsible leaders of the public want such literature. Yet, it is in the marketplace because the people want it for sense gratification. The people in general want to read. That is a natural instinct. But because their minds are polluted, they want such literatures. Under the circumstances, transcendental literature like Srimad Bhagavatam will not only diminish the activities of the corrupt mind of the people in general, but also will supply food for their hankering after reading some interesting literature. In the beginning, they may not like it, because one suffering from jaundice is reluctant to take sugar candy. But we should know that sugar candy is the only remedy for jaundice. Similarly, let there be systematic propaganda for popularizing reading of the Bhagavad Gita and the Srimad Bhagavatam, which will act like sugar candy for the jaundiced-like condition of sense gratification. When men have a taste for this literature, the other literatures, which are catering poison to society, will then automatically cease. We are sure, therefore, that everyone in human society will welcome Srimad Bhagavatam, even though it is now presented with so many faults, for it is recommended by Sri Narada, who has very kindly appeared in this chapter. So, just recently I did a program in a very nice family's house. They bought a new house. And when I was speaking a little bit, children have to keep quiet. Children have to keep quiet, otherwise you have to move outside the temple room. So, the gentleman that owned the house, he said, "Oh, Prabhu, you mentioned the Vedas." Yeah, I was speaking about the Vedas. and I said that there's the 4 original Vedas, Rig, Sama, Yajur, and Atharva Veda, and then Vyasadeva compiled them. There used to be 1 Veda, but he divided it into 4. And he gave each one of the Vedas to one of his 4, let's say, prominent disciples to form a disciplic succession on that 1 Veda. So there's one person was in charge of the first Veda, another one the second, another one the third, and they formed a school of disciples who memorized that particular Veda and were experts in it. And this way, they divided the responsibility of keeping the Vedic knowledge alive in oral tradition. Then the philosophical parts of the Vedas, the 4 original Vedas, are called the Upanishads, and there's 108 Upanishads. And then after that, Vyasadeva wrote the Puranas, ancient histories, and then he wrote the Mahabharata, the history of the world from creation to the end of the battle of Kurukshetra. And that was meant mainly for persons who don't have, let's say, a philosophical mind, but like to hear many stories that are instructive. So this Mahabharata is especially directed toward people who are a little bit less intelligent, but whose interest can be kept by hearing interesting stories. So the Mahabharata is full of stories, as 1.5 million verses, right? And however, after that, Vedavyas wrote the Vedanta Sutra, which is a very scientific presentation of the absolute truth, but aiming toward impersonal realization. And after all that, he felt dissatisfied. And his guru came and he asked him, why am I dissatisfied after writing so much first-class literature like this? And Narada Muni explained to him that, yes, you wrote so much, but basically you did not amplify knowledge of Krishna, which is the goal of all knowledge. Vedaischa sarvir aham eva vidya. The goal of all Vedic knowledge is to understand Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. He said, you wrote so much about Varnashram Dharma that you buried the bits and pieces of Krishna, direct knowledge of Krishna, in this avalanche of knowledge, and it obscured it. You had, information overload, and it's not clear after reading all those things who is the Supreme Personality of God. He said, therefore, now you just write the Srimad Bhagavatam, and the unique subject of Bhagavatam is understanding Krishna. So the Srimad Bhagavatam is a compendium of many of the things that he wrote previously, but by extracting the essence of understanding Krishna rather than burying the essence in a plethora of information. So we see that even the literary incarnation of Krishna himself, Vyasadeva, who's an individual soul like you and me, but who's endowed with a particular power by Krishna, which is called literary power of the Lord, he basically gave too much attention to dharma, artha, kama, moksha, religiosity, economic development, sense gratification, and liberation, and not clearly explaining who God is and what is our essential relationship with God, which is pure devotional service. So then he wrote the Srimad Bhagavatam. So the Srimad Bhagavatam, the goal of it is to educate us on who is Krishna and how to have a direct relationship with him with the help of pure devotees, or Shiksha and Diksha gurus. And by that knowledge, graduate to the level of pure devotional service. Knowledge is not enough to attain liberation from the cycle of birth and death. The knowledge has to be imbued, or let's say permeated with devotional service in order to attain perfection. Knowledge alone will never lead to perfection in spiritual life. But knowledge can be a very powerful stepping stone toward that. So this is explained in the Bhagavad Gita, where it says, right in the 3rd chapter, and where Arjuna is a little bit confused, and so Krishna says, one who restrains the senses. So why would someone restrain the senses? Because they have knowledge that the unrestrained senses are the cause of entanglement in the material world. One who restrains the senses of action, but whose mind dwells on sense objects, certainly deludes himself and is called a pretender. So those persons who are always studying, who always require knowledge, it doesn't mean that their mind is pure. It just means that their mind has a lot of information. But to purify the mind, one must engage the mind and the senses in the service of Krishna, in the association of genuine devotees. Then, knowledge and the activity of devotional service will liberate one from the cycle of birth and death. Simply having knowledge without devotional service will keep us entangled in the material world, because we won't be able to control the mind. And in the purport, Prabhupada says, there are many pretenders who refuse to work in Krishna consciousness, but make a show of meditation while actually dwelling within the mind upon sense enjoyment. Such pretenders may also speak on dry philosophy in order to bluff sophisticated followers, but according to this verse, these are the greatest cheaters. For sense enjoyment, one can act in any capacity of the social order, but if one follows the rules and regulations of his particular status, he can make gradual progress in purifying his existence. But he who makes a show of being a yogi while actually searching for the objects of sense gratification must be called the greatest cheater, even though he sometimes speaks of philosophy. His knowledge has no value, because the effects of such a sinful man's knowledge are taken away by the illusory energy of the Lord. Such a pretender's mind is always impure, and therefore his show of yogic meditation has no value whatsoever. So this is the description not only of the ancient so-called yogis, but very particularly the modern so-called yogis, who make a show of meditation, who can bend their body like a pretzel, but basically their mind is a sewer full of imagery of sense gratification, and therefore the whole thing is a pretension, an act. It's not actually purity in the highest sense. So it's important to be engaged in practical devotional service. That's the whole goal of Vedic knowledge, to convince a person that they should engage their mind and senses and intelligence 24 hours a day in the service of Krishna. That is the purpose of devotional service. That is the purpose of Krishna consciousness. That is the purpose of life. And then one is a candidate to get Krishna's mercy and become free once and for all from the cycle of birth and death. And this is explained in 18th chapter. Prabhupada says, 18th chapter, verse 65, where in the purport he writes, these words, Sarvadharmam Prityaja Mamekam Saranam Raja, stress that one should concentrate his mind upon Krishna, the very form with two hands carrying a flute, the bluish boy with a beautiful face and peacock feathers in his hair. There are descriptions of Krishna found in the Brahma Samhita and other literatures. One should fix his or her mind on this original form of Godhead, Krishna. One should not even divert his attention to other forms of the Lord. The Lord has multi-forms as Vishnu, Narayana, Rama, Varaha, etc. But a devotee should concentrate his mind on the form that was present before Arjuna. Concentration of the mind on the form of Krishna constitutes the most confidential part of knowledge, and this is disclosed by Arjuna because Arjuna is the most dear friend of Krishna. And then in verse 66, Prabhupada writes, one should be attracted by the beautiful vision of Krishna. His name is Krishna because he is all attractive. One who becomes attracted by the beautiful, all-powerful, omnipotent vision of Krishna is fortunate. There are different kinds of transcendentalists. Some of them are attached to the impersonal Brahman vision. Some of them are attracted by the super-soul feature, etc. But one who is attracted to the personal feature of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and above all, one who is attracted by the Supreme Personality of Godhead as Krishna himself, is the most perfect transcendentalist. In other words, devotional service to Krishna in full consciousness is the most confidential part of knowledge, and this is the essence of the whole Bhagavad Gita. Karma yogis, empiric philosophers, mystics, and devotees are all called transcendentalists, but one who is a pure devotee is the best of all. The particular words used here, ma sucha, don't fear, don't hesitate, don't worry, are very significant. One may be perplexed as to how one can give up all kinds of religious forms and simply surrender unto Krishna, but such a worry is useless. So here we see what is the actual goal of Bhagavad Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam. It's to help us fix our mind 24 hours a day, 365 days in a year, 366 on the leap year, on Krishna. And be so enthralled by the beauty and the majesty and the mercy of the Lord that we cannot see anything independent of the Lord. That is called spiritual vision. Material vision, you see things, but you don't see the connection to Krishna, although everything is connected to Krishna. Material vision is to see everything related to Krishna, and with the ingenuity and intelligence to understand how to use everything properly in the service of Krishna. Then we are Krishna conscious. Every action, every thought is Krishna conscious at that point. Okay, so if we waste our time reading mundane literature, Winnie the Pooh and Harry Potter and all that nonsense, that's not going to help us at all. And then if we go even deeper into illusion and watching movies, Netflix movies, and this movie and that movie, and reading this book and that book, all nonsense topics that have nothing to do with Krishna, all distractions that take our mind away from Krishna, and all things that are basically rubbish, all nonsense things. Just like you have these women's magazines, and there are hundreds of them, and they're talking about all these mundane things about relationships and so forth, and you have these PhD women writing scholarly, let's say, papers on how it's okay to cheat on your husband. It's not being unfaithful. In fact, it can even increase your faith in your husband. Does that make sense? You see, these are nonsense subjects, but they're PhDs, and they're supposed to be the intellectuals of the world, but it's all nonsense. It's all rubbish. It's garbage. But yet, people buy these magazines. In fact, if you ever watch the people at the checkout counter in the Safeway or the QFC or Fred Meyer, they always have all these nonsense magazines there. So the counter, yeah. And usually what they do is, and people are they're waiting to get checked out, and they're looking at the magazines, and all of a sudden they grab one and put it upside down, right? Now, why do they put it upside down? Because they don't want people to see that they're going to buy this nonsense magazine. And everybody knows it's nonsense, but they're attracted to it. They have all these titles, you know, Prince Andrew did this, and you know, Miley Cyrus that, and this one that, and you know, all rubbish people and rubbish topics, but there's an interest in it. I mean, if they were not selling, they wouldn't be there, right? That's the most prominent place, the checkout counter. You have a captive audience for at least 2-3 minutes, right? And they don't have anything else to do. They're bored, so they're looking at the magazines and they're looking, you know, oh, so and so, this thing, and then oh, Trump, oh, that thing, okay. So, and then they're not proud of buying the magazine. You know, it's not like, you know, they have a diamond ring. They say, hello, how are you? You know, and they're showing their finger with the ring, you know, so that you make sure that you see their ring. But the magazine, they put it upside down, or they put it upside down and put a bottle of milk on top of it, because they don't want you to see that they're an idiot. But yet, those magazines are selling, and people are consuming that rubbish. And all those rubbish ideas go into the mind and fill the mind with gobar. What's stool? You know, cow dung is actually purifying, so it's not gobar, it's human stool. Okay, so are there any questions about this? This is a wonderful verse, and we should very carefully go over it. Yeah.
Just like you mentioned that, you know, like when you over the counter, the headings over there are so catchy. People have 2-3 minutes and they look towards it, read it up, and that keeps on going in the mind for much
Yes.
time.
Yes.
But at the same time, even if you make a consciously an effort to read something spiritual, so Bhagavad Gita or Bhagavatam, the moment you finish it up, it hardly ever appears. It seems like as soon as you finish it up or close the book, it just gets washed out. How is that something that you just see?
Because reading is not enough. You have to hear it in the assembly of devotees. I mean, you're right. What you're explaining is a fact. You read it, it doesn't really register. You read Bhagavatam, it doesn't register. You read Bhagavad Gita, it doesn't register. It's only when you hear it spoken by genuine devotees and in the assembly of devotees and discuss it that it becomes significant in your life. Simply reading is not enough. That's why, what does it say? Let's go back to the introduction of the Bhagavatam. In the first couple of verses, it says that Srimad Bhagavatam, this is in the Canto 1, Chapter 1, verse number 1, in the purport. Srimad Bhagavatam is a narration of the Swarupa, meaning the form, of the Lord manifested by his internal potency. And this potency is distinguished from the external potency which has manifested the cosmic world, which is within our experience. Srila Vyasadeva makes a clear distinction between the two in this sloka, meaning the form of the Lord and all other things that we see in the material world. There's this clear distinction. Sri Vyasadeva says herein that the manifested internal potency is real, whereas the external manifested energy in the form of material existence is only temporary and illusory, like the mirage in the desert. In the desert mirage, there's no actual water. There's only the appearance of water. Real water is somewhere else. The manifested cosmic creation appears as reality, but reality, of which this is but a shadow, is in the spiritual world. So the reality is somewhere else. What we're seeing is a perverted reflection of that reality in this world. Absolute truth is in the spiritual sky, not the material sky. In the material sky, everything is relative truth. That is to say, one truth depends on something else. This cosmic creation results from the interaction of the three modes of nature, and the temporary manifestations are so created as to present an illusion of reality to the bewildered mind of the conditioned soul, who appears in so many species of life, including the higher demigods like Brahma, Indra, Chandra, and so on. In actuality, there's no reality in the manifested world. There appears to be reality, however, because of the true reality which exists in the spiritual world, where the personality of Godhead eternally exists with his transcendental paraphernalia. So, by reading Srimad Bhagavatam, we get an idea, but by hearing it spoken, the idea becomes much more concrete. And then discussing it, and thinking about it, and then explaining it to others, then it becomes a reality in your life. So reading is not enough. And it says here also how to read. You have to read in a systematic way, verse by verse, not jumping around, and carefully, day after day, week after week, month after month, this continual hearing and discussing. And then the first is Shravanam, hearing, then there's Kirtanam, repeating, and then there's Shravanam, remembering. The Smaranam, remembering. So that is the process, the spiritual process. Okay, so then therefore it says, Shinvata Swakata Krishna Punya Shravana Kirtana Hridyantaksto Badrani Vidunoti Suhit Shratam. So Srimad Bhagavatam, verse number 17. And it says, Shri Krishna, the personality of Godhead, who is the Paramatma, super soul in everyone's heart, and the benefactor of the truthful devotee, cleanses desire for material enjoyment from the heart of the devotee who has developed the urge to hear his messages. Shri Shri Radha Nilamadhava Ki Jai. So if you develop the urge to regularly hear, then Krishna is in your heart. He sees, this devotee is very interested in me. He likes to hear about me on a regular basis. He is discussing me. He is thinking about me. And therefore, I'm going to take a special interest in him or her and help them come closer and closer to me. So therefore it says, to hear about Krishna from the Vedic literatures or to hear from him directly through the Bhagavad Gita is itself righteous activity. So this is a righteous activity, coming to the class and hearing about the Lord from bona fide scripture and bona fide devotees. And for one who hears about Krishna, Lord Krishna, who's dwelling in everyone's heart, acts as a best wishing friend and purifies the devotee who constantly engages in hearing of him. In this way, a devotee naturally develops his dormant transcendental knowledge. So your transcendental knowledge, you have it already. You've experienced so many births and deaths. You were originally with Krishna. You just can't remember it. Just like, can you remember being with your mom when you were born? No. Would you deny that you were with your mom when you were born? No. So you just can't remember it. You can't say, no, I wasn't with her, I was somewhere else when I was born. No, that's a bunch of nonsense. You were with her. You were inside of her body, then you were pushed outside of the body. You were there. That's that little baby that's crying right after birth. That's you, right? But you can't remember it. Right? So that's our problem. We were with Krishna originally. We just can't remember it. However, if you purify the mind and the senses of lust, anger, greed, all these things, you can remember. And Krishna will help you remember. How do you improve your memory? You improve it by chanting Hare Krishna. This is said in Bhagavad Gita. We've read this before, but we'll read it again. Where it says, second chapter, 63rd verse, is it? Yes. Where it says, By development of Krishna consciousness, one can know that everything has its use in the service of the Lord. Let's see, wait a minute. Okay, that's not the quote. One second. Memory, one second. I'll find this verse. 22. Sorry. 422. It says, in this verse, the Lord Krishna stresses the importance of remembering him. One's memory of Krishna is revived by chanting the Mahamantra, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. By this practice of chanting and hearing the sound vibration of the Supreme Lord, one's ear, tongue, and mind are engaged. This mystic meditation is very easy to practice, and it helps one attain the Supreme Lord. There it is. You want to improve your memory of Krishna? Just chant Hare Krishna. Right? And regularly hear Bhagavad Gita and Bhagavatam in the association of devotees and spoken by sincere devotees. This is the formula for success. What is success? When you transcend the cycle of birth, death, old age, and disease, and by developing love for Krishna, you are a real success. And that's the greatest success, because there's no more birth, death, old age, and disease, and you go back to the spiritual world, or you could remain in the material world, but you're liberated all the time, because your mind is fixed on Krishna. Okay. Did I answer your question? Reading is not enough. Hearing regularly in association of good devotees and going over and over again on the main points, that will create a revolution in your life. What did Prabhupada say? Yeah, that this Bhagavatam is such transcendental literatures, even though imperfectly composed, are heard, sung, and accepted by purified men who are thoroughly honest. And it says, on the other hand, that literature which is full of descriptions of the transcendental glories of the name, fame, forms, pastimes, etc., of the unlimited Supreme Lord, is a different creation full of transcendental words directed toward bringing about a revolution in the impious lives of the world's misdirected civilization. There you go, yeah.
I gave the first canto to one of my colleagues.
Yeah.
It's like 2 or 3 rooms away from me in Microsoft. He kept it for 3 weeks. When I asked him, what did you understand? He said, oh, we have to be all good to each other. That's not what Srimad Bhagavatam says.
Well, no, he was just talking. He didn't look at the book. Yeah, that's tragedy. Tragedy. Okay, so we'll go to the next verse, which is number 12. Knowledge of self-realization, even though free from all material affinity, does not look well if devoid of a conception of the infallible God. What then is the use of fruitive activities which are naturally painful from the very beginning and transient by nature if they are not utilized for the devotional service of the Lord? Well, this just confirms that anityam asukam lokam, this material world is temporary place full of misery. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. As referred to above, not only ordinary literatures devoid of the transcendental glorification of the Lord are condemned, but also Vedic literatures and speculation on the subject of impersonal Brahman when they are devoid of devotional service. When speculation on the impersonal Brahman is condemned, on the above ground, then what to speak of ordinary fruitive work, which is not meant to fulfill the aim of devotional service? Such speculative knowledge and fruitive work cannot lead one to the goal of perfection. Fruitive work, in which almost all people in general are engaged, is always painful, either in the beginning or at the end. It can be fruitful only when made subservient to the devotional service of the Lord. In the Bhagavad Gita also, it is confirmed that the result of such fruitive work may be offered for the service of the Lord, otherwise it leads to material bondage. The bona fide enjoyer of the fruitive work is the personality of Godhead, and thus, when it is engaged for the sense gratification of living beings, it becomes an acute source of trouble. Well, this is a condemnation of the Mayavadis and of the fruitive workers. Mayavadis are trying to attain nirvana or nirahankar, whatever. And the fruitive workers want to be elevated to the heavenly planets for better sense gratification. So Krishna explains in this chapter, chapter 5, where he said that one second. I'm sorry. Chapter 2. Okay, so he says, the whole universe, the conditioned souls are mostly attracted by fruitive work because they want to enjoy life by the sweat of their own brows. The whole universe is full of fruitive workers in all species of life. The fruitive works include all kinds of economic development plans. But the law of nature provides that every action has its resultant reaction, and the performer of the work is bound up by such reactions, good or bad. The reaction of good work is comparative material prosperity, whereas the reaction of bad work is comparative material distress. But material conditions, either in so-called happiness or in so-called distress, are all meant ultimately for distress only. Foolish materialists have no information of how to obtain eternal happiness in the unconditional state. Sri Narada informs these foolish fruitive workers how to realize the reality of happiness. He gives direction to the diseased men of the world, how one's present engagement can lead one to the path of spiritual emancipation. The physician directs the patient to take treated milk in the form of curd for his sufferings from indigestion due to his taking another milk preparation. So the cause of the disease and the remedy of the disease may be the same, but it must be treated by an expert physician like Narada. The Bhagavad Gita also gives the same solution of serving the Lord by the fruits of one's labor that will lead one to the path of nice karma or liberation. So, one thing used incorrectly causes distress, and the same thing used correctly causes success. So distress or success. So if we use the fruits of our work to please the Lord, we will become free of karma. If we use the fruits of our work to please ourselves, we become more entangled. In fact, that's our motto downstairs, right? In our poster, do you see that at the entrance when you walk in? It says, the purpose of life is to work hard and use the fruits of labor to serve the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna. Right? That's our motto. Prabhupada said that should be our motto. We got that from one of the purports here. Huh? Yeah, I forget where it is. Okay, so, but the motto of the materialist is work hard, make a lot of money, and use it for your own sense gratification. So you have these two points of view, and most people are with the sense gratification point of view, and very few people are trying to serve the senses of Krishna by using their senses, their mind, their intelligence, their body in the service of the Lord. One thing gets you more entangled in birth, death, old age, and disease. The other thing liberates you eternally from birth, death, old age, and disease. Therefore it says, Kurvan evaha karmani, jijiva chek chatam samaha, evam tvayi nanyatetosti, nakarma lipyate nare. So this is the second or third verse of the Ishopanishad. Ishopanishad is a short book, but if you learn Ishopanishad, you have the whole philosophy. And it says here, it's mantra 2. One may aspire to live for hundreds of years if he continuously goes on working in that way. For that sort of work will not bind him to the law of karma. There's no alternative to this way for man. So therefore you have to read mantra 1. Ishavaisham idam sarvam jatkinja jagatyam jagat tenatak tena bunjitaha ma agridaha kasisriddanam. Everything animate or inanimate that is within the universe is controlled and owned by the Lord. One should therefore accept only those things necessary for himself which are set aside as his quota, and one should not accept other things, knowing well to whom they belong. And then it says, if you work in that way, that is, in other words, you live with a minimum for the maintenance of the body and soul together, not separate, otherwise you die. And everything beyond that minimum you use in the service of the Lord, then you can live for hundreds of years, you'll not be subject to the laws of karma. And it says, there's no alternative, not karma lipyate nare, there's no alternative to this way for mankind. Okay, so here are just a few verses, but they are full of transcendental realization and knowledge. This one little book, Prabhupada wrote, he purposely had this cover. He really liked this cover because Lord Vishnu is looking at you directly in this cover, right? And he's the goal of all Vedic knowledge, is to understand that he said, this picture defeats the Mayavadis. The Mayavadis say this doesn't exist. They say in Vaikuntha there's no Narayana, there's no Vishnu, it doesn't exist. So he said this picture defeats the Mayavadis. And this one book has the whole philosophy of Krishna consciousness in it. Okay, so now we're on verse number 13. And these are long verses and purports, so it takes a little while to get through them. O Vyasadeva, your vision is completely perfect. Your good fame is spotless. You are firm in vow and situated in truthfulness. And thus, you can think of the pastimes of the Lord in trance for the liberation of the people in general from all material bondage. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. People in general have a taste for literatures by instinct. They want to hear and read from the authorities something about the unknown. But their taste is exploited by unfortunate literatures which are full of subject matter for the satisfaction of the material senses. Such literatures contain different kinds of mundane poems and philosophical speculations, more or less under the influence of Maya, ending in sense gratification. These literatures, although worthless in the true sense of the term, are variously decorated to attract the attention of the less intelligent men. Thus, the attracted living entities are more and more entangled in material bondage without hope of liberation for thousands and thousands of generations, meaning thousands and thousands of rebirths in the material world. Narada Rishi, being the best among the Vaishnavas, is compassionate towards such unfortunate victims of worthless literatures. Usually you would think victim of an unfortunate accident, victim of a extortion scam, victim of sickness. But he's saying victim of worthless literatures like Harry Potter, like Winnie the Pooh, like Jack Kerouac, Dharma Bums, and there's millions of books. They're all nonsense. It's just a waste of time. But it's a little bit entertaining, it's entertaining in the sense it takes your mind completely away from Krishna and puts it on useless subjects. Say. Narada Rishi, being the best amongst the Vaishnavas, is compassionate towards such unfortunate victims of worthless literatures, and thus he advises Sri Vyasadeva to compose transcendental literature which is not only attractive, but can also actually bring liberation from all kinds of bondage. Srila Vyasadeva or his representatives are qualified because they are rightly trained to see things in true perspective. Oftentimes, people go, let's say, to Samamish Library. You go in and you start looking at all the books. You take one book and then take a second book, and you end up like 6 or 8 books. You're not going to read any of them, right? But you take out 6 or 8 books, right? Because you think you're going to read them all, and then soon, quickly, the day comes where you have to bring them back, right? So then you go online and you say you're going to keep it for another period, right? So you keep it for another, and you don't read them. You're looking at them, but you're so busy doing so many, you don't read them. And eventually, the next day comes, and you forget about it, and now you're a delinquent, right? So then you get all up flustered, and you go back and say, "Oh, I just forgot. I was out of town, and you're not going to charge me, are you? Because I was, well, sorry, that's the rules." But I was out of town, or I got sick. I can show you the doctor's letter. They said, okay, but you have to pay the money. So then you think, I'm never going to take out 6 books again. But then you look around again. You walk out with 8 books. You say the whole thing's a joke, right? I mean, you see all these books and these tantalizing titles, how to become a millionaire in 3 weeks, So you say, wow, this is a really important thing. How to win friends and influence people. I need to do that, All nonsense books, all useless topics. And you think that, this book really helped me, this is a great book, It didn't help you at all. Yeah, it helps you stay in the material world. Yeah, that's what it does. But it doesn't help you in significant effort to get free of the cycle of birth and death. Right? So it says, Srila Vyasadeva or his representatives are qualified because they are rightly trained to see things in true perspective. Srila Vyasadeva and his representatives are pure in thought due to their spiritual enlightenment, fixed in their vows due to their devotional service, and determined to deliver the fallen souls rotting in material activities. So this is the main point. A devotee asked me and said, well, I was listening to this lecture by so-and-so, and he said that the rules and regulations are like a vehicle, and the Harinam Mahamantra is like the gasoline. And, he went through this, I said, I never heard that example before. I said, but if you want to know what the rules and regulations are all about, they connect you to Krishna if you follow them. Because, chant Hare Krishna every day, 16 good rounds, read Bhagavad Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam, and listen to lectures every day, eat only prasadam, and go to the temple and do service, and give up intoxication, meat eating, gambling, illicit activities. I said, that will keep you connected. Yoga means connection to God. And real yoga is bhakti yoga. And bhakti yoga will keep you connected to Krishna. And it's the goal of the whole Vedic literature, to be always engaged in a pure devotional service of the Lord. So here it says, Srila Vyasadeva and his representatives are pure in thought due to their spiritual enlightenment, fixed in their vows due to their devotional service. Okay? Fixed in their vows. What is your vow? Follow the 4 regulative principles. But actually there are 8, right? 4 don'ts, 4 do's. So if you follow the devotion, it's not about, this one is the gas and that one is the vehicle. And, it's a bunch of nonsense, right? It just diverts the mind. Why don't we use what Prabhupada says, right? Why do you have to write a super intelligent book that diverts the mind from the essence? That fixed in their vows due to their devotional service and determined to deliver the fallen souls rotting in material activities. The fallen souls are very eager to receive novel informations every day, and the transcendentalists like Vyasadeva or Narada can supply such eager people in general with unlimited news from the spiritual world. Now, in one city like, say, San Francisco or New York, there can be like 100 newspapers and magazines, right? 100 or more. Now the number is decreasing because everyone has the internet, but before, that was their main source of information, reading the newspaper. There was once a preacher that was saying, hell is a horrible place. It's dark. It has poisonous gases, and it's cold, and it's black, and like that. So he was speaking to coal miners, and they were saying, "What's wrong with that? We're there every day, in the mine. It's black, it's cold, it has poisonous gases, So the preacher was realizing he wasn't able to scare them, and get them, riled up. And he said, and there are no newspapers. And they go, what? There's no newspaper? No, we don't want to go to hell, There's no newspaper there. So, that's what got them riled up, Then they got interested. I don't want to go to hell, So, yeah, because the newspaper was the main source of information for people before. Now you have the internet. All the newspapers are going bankrupt. All the magazines are going bankrupt because no one's reading them. They're getting their news and they're getting their information from the internet. So, if you want these novel informations every day, then Vyasadeva and Narada can supply such eager people in general with unlimited news from the spiritual world. If in one city there's 100 newspapers, and every day they're publishing it with news, imagine a spiritual sky which is 3 times bigger than the whole material creation put together. There's lots more news in the spiritual sky than there is in the material world. A lot more. And it's not degrading. It's transcendental. So that you don't have to be... So you read the news today, it's very, very discouraging. There's so many horrible things that is happening every day. Murders and this thing and that thing. But the spiritual world, there's no murders, there's no wars, there's no politics, there's no envy, there's no craziness. Everyone is ecstatic in going from one festival to another, going to higher and higher states of love and loving exchanges, and it is unlimited. Say, it's ananta, unlimited ecstasy. So Vyasa and Narada can supply such eager people in general with unlimited news from the spiritual world. In the Bhagavad Gita it is said that the material world is only a part of the whole creation, and that this earth is only a fragment of the whole material world. That's the whole point. And actually, the Bhagavad Gita and Bhagavatam are kaleidoscopic. What does that mean? Kaleidoscopic. If you ever look into a kaleidoscope, you see different levels of things, and it seems to be like an infinite series of different levels of things, right? So therefore you never get bored reading Bhagavatam, because every time you read it, even though you're reading something you already read 100 times, my God, something jumps out that you didn't realize before. So that's what I mean. It's kaleidoscopic. You see deeper and deeper levels of knowledge, even though you read something 100 times. The 101st time again, you see something new. Because this knowledge is revealed knowledge. It is not academic knowledge. Revealed knowledge means as we become purified, we see more. And the more we become purified, the more we see. And the more we see, the more we get interested in the subject. And then we suddenly realize it's kaleidoscopic. You know, you can look that word up. Many, many different levels of realization going on and perception going on. There are thousands and thousands of literary men all over the world, and they have created many, many thousands of literary works for the information of people in general for thousands and thousands of years. Unfortunately, none of them have brought peace and tranquility on the earth. This is due to a spiritual vacuum in those literatures. Therefore, the Vedic literatures, especially the Bhagavad Gita and the Srimad Bhagavatam, are specifically recommended to suffering humanity to bring about the desired effect of liberation from the pangs of material civilization, which is eating the vital part of human energy. The Bhagavad Gita is the spoken message of the Lord himself, recorded by Vyasadeva, and the Srimad Bhagavatam is the transcendental narration of the activities of the same Lord Krishna, which alone can satisfy the hankering desires of a living being for eternal peace and liberation from miseries. Srimad Bhagavatam, therefore, is meant for all living beings all over the universe for total liberation from all kinds of material bondage. Such transcendental narrations of the pastimes of the Lord can be described only by liberated souls like Vyasadeva and his bona fide representatives who are completely merged in the transcendental loving service of the Lord. Only to such devotees do the pastimes of the Lord and their transcendental nature become automatically manifest by dint or by virtue of devotional service. No one else can know or describe the acts of the Lord, even if they speculate on the subject for many, many years. The descriptions of the Bhagavatam are so precise and accurate that whatever has been predicted in this great literature about 5,000 years ago is now exactly happening. Therefore, the vision of the author comprehends past, present, and future. Such liberated persons as Vyasadeva are perfect not only by the power of vision and wisdom, but also in oral reception, oral meaning hearing, in thinking, feeling, and all other sense activities. A liberated person possesses perfect senses, and with perfect senses only can one serve the sense proprietor, Hrishikesha, Sri Krishna, the personality of Godhead. Srimad Bhagavatam, therefore, is the perfect description of the all-perfect personality of Godhead by the all-perfect personality, Srila Vyasadeva, the compiler of the Vedas. Shri Krishna Bhagavan ki jai, Srila Vyasadeva ki jai, Srila Prabhupada ki jai. See, nobody else can write like this. Nobody else has the enthusiasm for Krishna to write like this. They write all this vapid meaning it's like it's stale and tasteless literature using, vulgar images. It's like in English you say, you kill two birds with the same stone. What kind of an image is that? Instead of saying that, you say, you can gulp 2 gulabs with 1 gulp. Okay, but what is it? You kill 2 birds with 1 stone. You can skin a rabbit in no time. What kind of an image is that? Skin a rabbit. You see how these phrases in English are horrible. The imagery is horrible, right? So we have to read this type of literature with Prabhupada's beautiful eloquence, and it's all about Krishna. It's all uplifting, but he gives you both sides of the picture. If you want to learn what is Mayavad, if you want to learn what is the material conception of life, you want to learn what is wrong without doing the wrong, you read Bhagavatam. You get, because it says, Vidyam chayas yastad vedabhayam saha, vidyaya militam tirtha, Vidyayamritam asnute. Shishupanishad, verse number 10. Verse number 10. Let's see where it is, what it says. It's verse number 11. Only one who can learn the process of nescience, meaning ignorance, and that of transcendental knowledge side by side, can transcend the influence of repeated birth and death and enjoy the full blessings of immortality. So, you don't have to experience marijuana. You don't have to experience stealing. You don't have to experience murder. You just read Bhagavatam, and it explains both sides simultaneously. What is vidya, knowledge, and what is avidya, ignorance. Okay. So, in the material world, it's a world of duality. And rather than become a victim of duality, you can learn about it without becoming victimized by it, by reading Bhagavatam. So it teaches you both sides, knowledge and ignorance. Why does it also teach what ignorance is? So that ignorance doesn't become an obstacle to your quest for knowledge. So you don't have to, you don't say, well, wait a minute, Dad, I'm going to take a break for 1 year and engage in sinful activity so I can learn what sin is. No, you don't have to do that. You don't have to do that. You can learn what sin is by reading Bhagavatam and Bhagavad Gita. There's 3 ways of learning. One is hearing about it. That's first class. And understanding. 2 is you hear about it, but you want to see it also. That's second class. 3rd is you want to hear about it, you see it, but you want to do it. That's 3rd class. And the 4th, 5th, 6th class is you hear about it, you see it, you do it, and you continue doing it. That is complete nonsense. So, best is you can learn about sinful life, you can learn about ignorance from the Bhagavatam by hearing. You don't have to do it to actually learn it. Hare Krishna. All glories to Srila Prabhupada ki jai. So we stopped on verse 14. Are there any questions, comments, confessions, or etc.?
You started that you went to somebody's home, but you never finished. What happened after that?
Yeah. Let's see. Let me remember what I was going to say. Yeah, there was a question. The question was, okay, the son is precocious. That means he's only 17, but he's in first year of college. So he graduated high school earlier. And he wanted to know, if I'm not mistaken, he wanted to know why, I think it was why we condemn scientists, mundane scientists, and empirical knowledge. So I gave him an example. I said, let's say you're in an airplane, you're flying over the Pacific, and you have a camera, and you say, let me take a picture of the Pacific. So you open your little window, like you look out the window, and you get your camera, you click, right? And then when you go home, you say, oh, I took a picture of the Pacific Ocean. You show someone. Now, how much of the Pacific Ocean do you see from that picture that you took from the moving airplane? Right? You don't see anything. What? 1/500 billionth of the ocean. That's all you see. You don't actually see anything, right? So that's empirical knowledge. If you just rely on your senses to acquire knowledge, you'll hardly see anything. It's just like we send a robot to Mars. Let's go the opposite way. Let's say the Martians send a robot to the Earth, and it lands in the middle of the Arabian desert, and it sends back pictures. This is the Earth, So they look carefully there at the pictures and say, wait a minute, it's a waste of time going there. There's nothing there. It's just sand. Let's go to Mercury and see what's there, right? You see, you don't see anything, right? What's the robot going to tell you about Mars? It's not going to tell you much about Mars, right? And if the robot of the Martians lands, in the Arabian Desert or lands in the Sahara Desert, they're going to say, let's not go there. It's a waste of time. There's nothing there. It's just a bunch of sand. You see? So our ability to see with our senses is extremely limited. Like, even if you look at a person, what do you see? I only see maybe 1% of Prabhuji Raja, right? Raja Kripa Prabhu. Why? Because I don't see his gallbladder, I don't see his liver, I don't see his heart, I don't see his intestines, I don't see his ribs, I don't see this, I don't see that. I hardly see anything, right? I don't see his mind, right? I don't see anything, right? I just see, a nose and eyes. That's it. It's hardly anything. So if we rely only on knowledge acquired by the material senses, we don't see hardly anything. So I was explaining to him, it's very inadequate, And even though there's so many intelligent people and they learned, the laws of aerodynamics by watching birds, and they learn how to build bridges, and they learn how to do this and do that. Okay, it's impressive, but it's actually not essential. It just makes sense gratification more easily available. Like before, there was no I-90 bridge, there was no 520 bridge. So to go from Sammamish or Redmond to Seattle, it took most of the day. Because you had to go, or else you had to go by horse and buggy all the way around Lake Sammamish. Not Lake Sammamish, but Lake Washington, right? It could take a whole day with a horse and buggy, right? And or you had to go down to the shoreline and then take a boat across. And that was only 100 years ago, maybe less than that. They didn't build these bridges until relatively recently. And then one of the bridges, the I-90, fell down. Did you know that? It collapsed in a storm, and they had to rebuild it. So they make mistakes also. So, life, all these so-called technological advances simply make sense gratification a little bit easier. It doesn't really solve the problem. I mean, people were living 100 years ago without the I-90 and without the 520, and they had kids and they had schools. Like right next to my farm was the original Pioneer School in Redmond, right? It was torn down in the 1930s. It was a one-room building. They weren't spending, they didn't have a new education proposal on the ballot, for $3 billion to build for the next 2 years. It's a bunch of nonsense. There was just a wooden, small house-like building, and the kids were educated, and it turned out good. They turned out good. So, all these material advances just make sense gratification more readily available, but it doesn't really solve the problem of human life. Of birth, death, old age, and disease.
Bill Gates started a group in Microsoft called Unlimited Potential,
Yeah.
and he gave lots of laptops and software free to kids in rural Africa.
Yeah.
The first thing they did was watch pornography.
Yeah, of course. Every month, the number one object of search engines is pornography. It far surpasses all other searches, you see. So all it has done is just made sense gratification more easily available. It hasn't really improved the quality of the people, right? Okay, so we'll end on that. Right, so that was my answer to him.
Srila Prabhupada.
Hare Krishna, glory to Srila Prabhupada. So just imagine if you had a Facebook page with 3 million people, 3 million followers, what would happen? You'd be on it 24 hours a day trying to answer them and keep them entertained so they stay.
One of them may murder the person who has the Facebook page.
That also happens.
Crazy people, right?
Yeah. No, but it would be time consuming. You have to keep them interested in your web page so they keep coming back.
Such a pressure.
Yeah.
Now all these big leaders, they have such followers, like Narendra Modi has like 2 million, 10 million.
Trump has 60 million.
Yeah.
That's why he's tweeting every day. You know.
He just blasphemes.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's people like that, right? So, if you go to a movie and it's all about, how much a mother loves her son, it's not very interesting, anymore. But if you go to a movie and there's murder and there's war and there's lust and everything, so that was a great movie, man, If you go to a movie, it's about how to chant Hare Krishna, but wait a minute, it's so boring, I walked out in the middle, right? People want to go to get stimulated, in the mode of ignorance.
Thank you so much.